So if we looked at the first scenario where, we're having an accurate tracking of our resources, and in the second scenario we talked about the forecasting and the staffing from a sales pipeline perspective, all of this really feeds into, a resource workbench or a resource scheduling. So this really speaks to, the SPI and the professional services organization need around having a centralized manner to automate resource management. The screenshot you're seeing in front of you, so I've highlighted at the top, obviously the ability to filter by various criteria. So whether you're doing staffing, as Gord alluded to, on a weekly basis, you're staffing for a project, an automated tool is capable of supporting whatever resource management strategy fits your organization. So if I continue through, we can retrieve a certain group of resources in our organization, and I've highlighted one. So Mr. John Doe is an engineer in our organization, and we're going to focus on that specific resource. So, whether it be a particular manager or a particular project that you need to staff, one of the key characteristics, of John Doe, if we look at him, is he actually has an engineering designation. So we can see at a glance on our resource workbench, I guess relative to the rest of our firm, he's doing well because he's the only one that's utilized, but we still feel that his utilization is a little low. The middle section, provides at a glance to the resourcing management professional or the project manager the available work in your system, whether that be an opportunity or a forecast or an actual hard commitment, and it can perform some best fit analysis. So the colored flags really align to the different skills and criteria we've defined on John Doe relative to the engagement or the project. So if we focus in on John Doe as a resource, and we have this particular inspection engagement, and we focused on what criteria are required to actually staff this. And one of the key criteria we can see from the highlighted box at the bottom is that we need a mechanical engineer. And this isn't a nice to have for this inspection engagement, it's an absolute requirement. So whether that be legislative requirement, a customer request, so there is the ability to enforce mandatory as well as optional requirements. Based on, a best fit match between available resources and requirements for the engagement, centralized resource model, you need to provide the ability in a single area to actually staff the resource. And staff really, from a scheduling perspective, takes one of two forms. You can, envision in a pipeline scenario or a forecast scenario where I can do a soft, i.e. he would be the best resource, or I can actually do a hard commitment and assign him to the work. So once I go through that, those resource allocations are saved successfully. All this ties in from an integrated standpoint, so we a resource view, but if we now change to a project manager view or a reporting view, we can see back to that inspection project, we can see who's assigned. If we click through, we can see, because this is an integrated system, that John Doe has actually been assigned to this work. And, this also transcends through into a time entry scenario. So, John Doe has now been assigned to the work. If he goes into the time and expense reporting system, that project or that task or that activity will be available for him to enter time and expense against. Finally, just to close out from a sort of demonstration perspective, the element of everyone informed. So, having a centralized resource management system, is great, but if you can't communicate that information to the necessary people, the value becomes diminished. So just some examples from keeping everyone informed perspective, whether that be, looking at staffing on a monthly basis or a period basis by resource. so we can see a breakdown of utilization, in this case by resource, by time period, or by week. A second, we can continue to see additional details, so see the actual projects or assignments that have been provided to, in this case, John Doe. So that really brings us back to where I started the conversation around, there's many challenges that we've walked you through in this discussion around managing or better managing your organization and really better aligning your staffing and your sales. And, some of these challenges, just to reiterate, around, accurate tracking of resource profiles, the ability to align from a sales pipeline or a quotation perspective, beginning to identify resource requirements. And finally, it's about having everyone in your organization aware of these staffing requirements. Often what happens in a siloed type scenario is people aren't necessarily aware that there is availability or there is a skill set. So part of having, SPI's thought and their research, part of having an integrated application supporting these business processes really is to provide that visibility and ultimately, linking into some of those KPIs and improvements in your organization. So I just wanted to, close out the demonstration portion and turn it just back over to Gord for a few closing remarks.
Okay, so we're going to follow up with a package and send out some of the materials from this. You're certainly welcome to peruse our website. There's lots of additional information. The webinar will be up there. There's another webinar that we did last year that's also up there that will give you some additional information. And if you have an interest in some of the things that we spoke about, we'd be happy to arrange a follow-up meeting or discussion on the phone. I think at this point what we'll do is open it up to questions, and if feel free to ask any, and we'll take those and then conclude the webinar.
Okay, we do have a few questions that have come in throughout the presentation. So the first one would be, how do you balance capturing relevant employee profile information with maintaining it to keep it current?
Yeah, this is James. So I think, I mentioned a couple of areas, that I've seen challenges in the past managing a team of resources, and it's about identifying, whether it's 3 or 4 key attributes that you need to staff. So, keeping track of irrelevant details as part of a skills profile isn't the intent and often becomes onerous. So, if you focus in on the, as I say, 3 or 4 key elements that you're required to staff, and it's going to depend obviously on your segment. I focused on engineering, for example. So am I a PN, yes or no? Do I have an accounting designation, yes or no? That really helps, maintain the currency, because you're absolutely right. Like, having this data and entering it once is great, but if we can maintain it and keep it up to date, it becomes less useful and relevant over time.
Okay. Second, when does centralized resource management make sense?
Yeah, this is Gord. My perspective on this would be that, if you're over 100 consultants in your firm, then clearly a centralized approach would probably provide kind of better utilization, better resource management. If you're under 30, then clearly, kind of local management would make sense. And then in between that would be a gray area where there'd be kind of other factors you'd have to consider.
Okay. I think we have time for 2 more. So third, what factors would you consider when choosing which resource management strategy is best for my organization?
Yeah, it's Gord again. From my point of view, size of the organization, so in terms of total number of consultants, is a key consideration. The size of the project, so if you have very large projects that span many months or up to a year, that would drive you towards a different type of resource strategy. The nature of what you're selling, so if it's very homogeneous and you're doing one thing, or whether you have a multifaceted consultancy that does a whole variety, has a whole variety of offerings. And then finally, kind of the level of domain expertise that you are requiring, and then secondary that you're trying to build. All those would kind of impact, which resource strategy makes sense.
Time for one more. So somebody has said, I already have an accounting system. Can I use this solution solely for resource management?
So it's James. I would say, so the solution we demonstrated really is an integrated offering. So it's a full enterprise resource planning package, GL, AP, and AR, and a professional services automation solution. So the specific solution, I would say, not likely, but there are other offerings available that we've provided to some of those customers in the early days that could help your resource management.
Well, I think any other questions, Brett? That's it. Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for their time, and feel free to follow up if you have any additional questions or comments. Thanks again.